Thanks for making the move with us over here to clickondetroit.com, continuing our conversation from the broadcast side about Detroit Works with Karla Henderson and Dan Kinkead. Where we were just leaving off, I was just mentioning during the break there, this, if you're an urban planner, is probably about as good as it gets, because very few cities get a chance to remake themselves in any meaningful way. But Detroit, you kind of have a chance to, you know, I referred to it a while ago as an etch-a-sketch. Right. You kind of have a chance to, so in a way, there's some real beauty here to what you get a chance to take a shot at, right?
Yeah, I think in some ways that there is, and Detroit is also a city that's gone through major cycles over its history, right? And I think we're coming out of one and emerging into another. But at the end of the day, you know, as a planner and quite honestly, as a resident, a person who's raising his family here, right. The stakes are really high. I mean, this matters. This really matters. People's lives are at stake, their livelihoods, and we want to make sure that we can create a dynamic, you know, sustainable, viable city, but also a city that can improve the quality of life for all Detroiters, period. We have to do things that can make it better.
Okay, so it's a cosmic etch-a-sketch. It's nothing, no child's play here. Karla, let's talk about a couple of the big issues that face you all as you move forward. One of the big ones that we've seen bubble up in a lot of ways, land use. Lots of people have ideas for what to do with Detroit's vacant land, and yet once you make an allowance for one, say urban farming, enhanced farms, everybody else is going to expect the same access, the same consideration. How do you start to balance all this?
Well, we've been working with John Hance and his team for almost 3 years, so it's not a newcomer to the table. So we are. But
even after 3 years, there are some residents who greet him with some suspicion.
Absolutely. But I think what we have to sometimes step back is we're talking 1,900 parcels out of 70,000 that the city owns. So we're talking, quite frankly, a very small minority
it's true.
Of the land, and also it kind of ties back into what Dan was talking about with the long term. It addresses ecology, economic impact, and also neighborhood stabilization, because where we are interested in Hance putting his trees abuts Indian Village. Right now, that area is very blighted and very challenged and distressed, and we believe that that will have an impact on stabilizing that community adjacent to it.
This was an interesting idea. I think when we all were first hearing about farming, we had sort of ideas about the way most of us think about farming: fields of corn, you know, fruits and vegetables. Timber, all of a sudden, seemed to be a very kind of a twist on our expectations. What did it what did it mean for you when that was where this started to turn?
No, it's a good point. I think the way we look at it is that it's an important land management tool in a lot of ways. Sure. It's one that you know can help to clean our air and clean our water, and that really you know, urban agriculture in itself, we don't really see necessarily as a large-scale land management or land use component. We do think it's very important in the way it lays out, but it's actually much more important, we believe, from an economic development perspective, particularly from employment. When you link the things together, like food production, the growth of food, the actual processing of the food in places that we have inside the city, like Eastern Market, right, with the actual transportation, distribution, and logistics that go out to actually distribute the food out, that provides a value-added chain that can provide a lot of opportunity for employment.
It can, but I've always been a little dubious about that side of the idea of urban farming. I've made the point before on this program. My family used to be a farming family. We used to be a farming family because it's really hard to make money at it. If you're not a corporate, you know, everything's a corporate farm now, and we look at what, say, an average tomato picker gets paid. It's not a haul that we're not talking about a boom. Are we?
Yeah, we're probably not, but I think at the end of the day, we see, you know, there's a real kind of cachet or identity around these locally grown foods, right? Locally sourced stuff that people really like. It may end up being really more of a boutique type item for sure. And it's not that you're going to scale up to an industrial, you know, this isn't industrial ag, but you can find a way to make that network work. And if you think about folks, you know, like Cher with Gary Wozniak's actually putting together. This is really at its heart an opportunity to provide employment opportunities to folks who in the past have been completely disadvantaged and haven't had an access to employment. So in a lot of ways it can help get things going.
Yeah, and if I could add, you know, we recently entered into an MOU with Michigan State University to put an integrated food cluster system. MSU has done a great job of bringing in the Hans Farm folks, and then the Malik Yukini, who is growing over in one of the city parks, to look at using this as an experiment to take all across the world in terms of vertical agriculture, taking abandoned buildings and how you read, you know, some of the technology that needs to. MSU is the leader, particularly in this country, and so we're very excited about it. So it's, yes, it's some of it's the small kind of urban gardens, but then when, you know, the president of MSU said, you know, how do you win a Super Bowl? You got to start, you know, training at some point, and she really sees long term that this could really impact millions of people around the world.
Yeah. I want to ask both of you can weigh in on this, because in a way a lot of this goes back to blight and a lot of the way that these neighborhoods have fallen into disrepair. And I think that is we get it certainly in emails and phone calls if there's a top 5 of frustrations for Detroiters. How do we go about marrying some of these ideas that you're talking about with also at the same time starting to crack into this enormous problem?
Well, I think, you know, we look at it in a couple different ways. The first is that we do have to have, you know, greater code enforcement in general in the way our areas look, the way they're kept up. But we need to do that in a way that continues to work within the neighbors that actually live in that neighborhood to find a way to get a solution rather than to just, you know, kind of file a claim there. At the same time, we also think that there's ways in which we can actually utilize the existing public land holdings to improve the conditions there. There are many neighborhoods across the city, in fact all, have some degree of public land in them, and we can develop better strategies regarding disposition and acquisition that can either put property on the market or take it off the market to make sure there's actually a strategic land holding there in which things can be improved and actually stabilized over time.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Of course, being short term, we have immediate impacts.
Yes.
And so,
in fact, it's interesting though, because, you know, Mayor Bing joins a long line of mayors now who have come in and said, this is how many buildings we're going to knock down, and then you get into it, and the problem is so much bigger than you can envision, and so much more expensive than you can afford.
It's very expensive, yeah. So there's 2 things that have to happen. One, we have to stop the vacancy, because once that structure becomes vacant, it gets stripped, it just becomes a blight, and we know what blight does in neighborhoods. Yeah, it just spreads. So we've got to be very strategic and develop programs that encourage kind of people coming back to the city of Detroit or moving in certain areas while we do the demolition. So it definitely has to happen concurrently.
To Dan's point though about what we require of the owners, you know, if a kid has a really messy room, we can call it a sloppy kid, but the man or the woman of the house are not exactly making the proper demands on the kid to clean his room.
Yes, and I think you'll see we've taken a much aggressive challenge against these property owners. We've identified the top 10 negligent property owners. We've gone very public with that, and really need working with our law department to step up and start to take some action against them.
What do we do with this when the final plan is all delivered? What do we do with it?
Well,
how do we make it happen? How do, you know, I know that's a concern of yours. Is we're putting a lot of work into creating the plan, and then.
Well, I think what's great about this is that it's not just going to be up to the city to implement.
Right.
That we're going to be looking for the foundations and the business community and others, the residents themselves, to rally around this plan, because city government can't do it by itself. And so where we play a role, we will play that role. But really, it's going to take all of us to turn this city around.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you about was with transportation. And this is interesting in 2 fronts, because obviously we all understand the transportation failures that the region has suffered. But it's been interesting watching the way the business community has tried to create it's as if they've said, look, we're going to bypass government and do this on our own. It's a powerful thing, but you also kind of need everybody coordinated, everybody working in the same direction. So what's your take right now on what's going on with transit and how important it is to where you're wanting to get.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, what's happening right now in downtown into Midtown, particularly with the streetcar line that's there, you know, is in itself you know, an economic growth concept, right? It's about, because once you lay those rails down, the investors in these areas can have a heck of a lot more confidence that when they put something there, that that train's going to continue to run. It's different. It's different than a bus, and so that matters. From a transportation perspective, though, out throughout the entire city and out throughout the region, we know that, look, a third of our households in the city of Detroit do not have an access to a private vehicle, right? That's a fifth of the population. Right. So for these folks to gain employment, like we were talking about earlier, they need to have real viable opportunities for transportation. So we do think that includes the bus rapid transit system, the BRTs with dedicated lanes to connect out, to make sure we can link all of the different employment centers together across the entire region.
Is that long-term or short-term when we're talking about a rail line?
I think that is long-term.
It's long-term, but it has to start.
But it has to start
But
today.
we need it now.
Yes.
Exactly right. Both of you, thanks so much, Karla and Dan. Really appreciate the conversation. And thank you for being here as well. We'll see you back over on the broadcast side next Sunday morning at 10 for Flashpoint.